The sky was red above the ruined planet. Ash floated through the air like snow. Tall black trees stood like silent guards, watching everything. Jackson, a human scout, stepped out of the ship and looked around. His eyes scanned the jungle as the wind whistled through broken stone towers. He had been sent to guide someone. Someone very special, very stubborn. Her name was Valari. She was an alien girl with sharp green eyes and soft blue skin. She had 2 small horns on her forehead and wore a brown cloak. She stood with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed. "I don't need protection," she snapped at Jackson without even saying hello. Jackson raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He had worked with her kind before, brave and reckless. "I'm just your guide," Jackson said calmly. "The jungle doesn't care how strong you are." Valari rolled her eyes and walked ahead, stepping over twisted roots and old bones. Jackson sighed and followed, keeping his hand close to his blaster. He didn't trust this place, not one bit. The trees were too quiet. And even the wind felt wrong. The jungle they entered was dark and full of vines. Strange sounds echoed from deep inside. Valari walked quickly, pretending to be fearless, but her hands trembled just a little, and she kept glancing behind her. Jackson noticed, but didn't say a word. He knew what fear looked like, and she was hiding it well. A strange rustling came from above. Branches moved when there was no wind. Valari stopped and looked up. Jackson stepped beside her and whispered, "Something is watching us, Valari." Pulled out a small knife, but it shook in her hand. She whispered, "I told them I didn't need a babysitter." Then suddenly, something jumped down. It moved fast, like a shadow with claws. Valari screamed and jumped toward Jackson without thinking. She wrapped her arms and legs around him. Clinging to his back like a terrified monkey, Jackson dropped to one knee and fired his blaster into the trees. The creature vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving only a growl behind. Valari was breathing hard. Still stuck to his back, Jackson gave her a small smirk and said, "Didn't need protection." "Huh." Valari growled but didn't let go. Her pride was wounded more than her body. She slowly slid off his back and looked away, cheeks slightly purple. "That thing was fast," she muttered. "It surprised me." Jackson nodded and scanned the trees. With his visor, "I've seen creatures like that before," he said. "Hunters, smart ones. They follow you for days, learning your steps. Then strike when you're tired." Valari swallowed hard and stared into the jungle. Her face was serious now. No more jokes. They kept walking. Slower this time, Valari stayed close to Jackson. No longer racing ahead, the trees seemed to close in around them. The jungle felt alive, and it wasn't friendly. An old stone road appeared beneath their feet, covered in moss. Ruins of ancient buildings rose around them like ghosts. Valari whispered, "My people once lived here, a long time ago." Jackson glanced at her, surprised. "You've been here before." Valari shook her head. "No, only in stories." They stopped near a broken statue of a warrior with 4 arms. Valari touched the stone gently, her eyes softer now. "I thought I was ready," she said quietly. "But this place? It's different." Jackson nodded. "It's okay to be scared." She looked at him sharply. "I'm not scared." But her voice was too quick, too defensive. Suddenly, a low growl came from the trees again. Jackson raised his blaster, and Valari stepped behind him without thinking. They both looked around, waiting for another attack. But nothing came, just silence. They moved again, careful and quiet. The sun began to set. Casting orange light through the leaves, Valari walked beside Jackson now, not ahead. She watched the shadows closely, her knife ready. As night fell, they found a small shelter under a rock ledge. They built a small fire and sat close. Valari didn't talk much, just stared into the flames. Jackson handed her a ration bar. and she took it without a word before sleeping. Valari asked softly, "Have you ever lost someone on a mission?" Jackson looked into the fire, his eyes sad. "Yes," he said. More than once, Valari didn't ask more. But her eyes were wet with thoughts. She curled up near the fire, still holding her knife. Jackson stayed awake a little longer, watching. The jungle, he knew they were being followed, and he knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would be worse, but something told him the alien girl beside him was stronger than she knew. The night was thick and heavy, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Jackson sat with his back against the stone wall, blaster across his lap, eyes half open. The fire had gone out, leaving only the dim glow of cooling embers. Valari was asleep beside him, curled up like a child, her knife still in her hand, but Jackson didn't feel safe. Not for a second. Something out there was watching them. He could feel it, like cold fingers on the back of his neck. It hadn't attacked again, but that didn't mean it was gone. Predators like that didn't give up. They waited, they studied, and then they struck when you least expected it. A twig snapped in the dark. Jackson lifted his blaster in silence, slow and steady. Nothing moved, no wind, no birds, no sound, only the darkness breathing around them. Suddenly, Valari stirred in her sleep. Her body twitching, she gasped and sat up, eyes wide, her chest rising fast. Was it real? She asked, not knowing she had spoken aloud. Jackson nodded slowly. It's still out there. Valari hugged her knees to her chest, her horns touching her arms. She looked much smaller than before. I thought I was ready for this, she whispered. Jackson didn't answer. Sometimes silence spoke louder than comfort. He tossed a small stone into the dark just to test the air. Something hissed in response, not far off. Valari jumped and moved closer to him without thinking. The two of them sat there, side by side. Weapons ready. They didn't speak, only listened. Time crawled, and the jungle seemed to press in closer with every breath. Then, just before dawn, the noise returned. A rustle, a low growl, something sliding through the trees. This time, it wasn't trying to be silent. It wanted them to hear it. It was toying with them. Jackson grabbed Valari's wrist and pulled her up. We're not staying, he said. Voice firm. Valari didn't argue. She followed close behind as they left the shelter and moved deeper into the jungle. The sunlight barely touched the ground here. Tall trees and thick vines made the path. Almost invisible, they stepped over bones, broken machines, and glowing fungi that pulsed like breathing skin. Valari looked at them with fear. This place feels wrong, she said. Jackson agreed, but didn't want to say it out loud after an hour of silence. Valari finally spoke again. My people used to travel through these lands, she said. But then something happened. Jackson looked at her. What happened? Valari hesitated, then said, we stopped coming back. They found a dried-up river, its cracked bed covered with claw marks. Jackson crouched and touched one of them, his fingers fitting neatly into the groove. Big, he muttered. And fast. Valari knelt beside him, her face pale. I think I know what this is, she said quietly. It's a nightclaw. Jackson frowned. I've only read about them in war logs. They used to wipe out whole patrols. Valari nodded. They were created long ago, used in wars. Then abandoned. Now they hunt for sport. A cold silence fell over them. Then Valari looked at him and asked, Why are you helping me? Jackson was surprised by the question. Because you were sent to retrieve something important, he said. And maybe, he added, you're not as alone as you think. Valari looked away, chewing her lip. I lost someone in the last war, she whispered. She was stronger than me, faster, smarter. But she didn't come back. She died protecting me. Jackson didn't speak. He just nodded. They walked for hours without rest. Every sound in the jungle made them flinch. At one point, a screech came from high in the trees.
I.
And Valari pressed herself to Jackson's back again. But when nothing attacked, she stepped back, embarrassed. "I wasn't scared," she said. Jackson didn't tease her. He simply smiled and said, "I didn't say you were," by late afternoon. They reached the edge of a cliff. Below them was a hidden valley filled with broken towers and glowing lights. Valari gasped, her voice shaky. "That's the lost city," Jackson lowered. His visor and zoomed in. "I see movement," he said. "But not friendly." Valari gripped his arm tightly. "What now?" she asked. "We go around," Jackson said, quietly. But before they could move, the growl came again, closer than ever. Valari froze, her hands trembling, from the jungle behind them. Red eyes glowed in the dark. The Nightclaw had returned. And this time, it wasn't alone. Jackson raised his blaster slowly. Valari stepped beside him, blade drawn, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't need protection," she said again. But her feet moved closer to his, her shoulder touching his arm. They stood together, surrounded by shadows. The jungle, watching, waiting, breathing. Lightning flashed across the sky, even though there were no clouds. The ground beneath Jackson and Valari trembled for a second, like something deep below had just awakened. They didn't speak. They only stared ahead at the forgotten valley, filled with strange lights and tall, broken towers. The jungle behind them had gone silent, too silent. No growl, no rustle, not even the wind. Something was very wrong. Valari stepped forward slowly. Her eyes locked on the glowing symbols carved into a massive stone wall. The air felt heavy, as if 1,000 voices were whispering all at once but couldn't be heard. Jackson moved beside her, keeping his blaster ready. "Whatever this place is," he said quietly. "It doesn't want us here." Valari didn't respond. Her fingers traced one of the symbols glowing softly on the wall. It lit up under her touch, like it recognized her. Then the giant stone doors began to open with a deep, groaning sound. Dust flew everywhere, and the ground shook again. Jackson stepped back and pointed his weapon, expecting something to come out, but nothing did. Just a long, dark hallway, lit by pale blue lights along the floor. Valari took a deep breath and walked inside. Jackson hesitated, then followed. He whispered, "I've got a bad feeling about this." The hallway was colder than outside. The walls were covered with carvings of battles, starships, and creatures that looked half machine, half live. Valari stared at them in awe, her face lit by the blue glow. "I think this is one of the old temples," she said softly. "From before my people lost the war." Jackson looked closer at the carvings. Some of them showed aliens like Valari, standing tall with weapons made of light. Others showed their enemies, dark creatures with long claws and glowing eyes. One carving made his blood run cold. It showed the same monster that had been hunting them, the Nightclaw. Except here, it was not alone. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, before he could say anything. A loud voice echoed through the hallway. It wasn't human, and it wasn't Valari's language either. It sounded ancient, layered, metallic. Then a strange floating machine appeared at the end of the hall. It was round, with long arms and a glowing eye in the center. Valari stepped forward, frozen in place. The machine turned toward her and spoke again. This time in clear, perfect words. "You carry the blood of the star heir," it said. Jackson raised his blaster. But Valari put a hand on his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking, "I think it's talking to me." The machine hovered closer, lights flickering across its body. "You are not ready," it said, "but the jungle has awakened, and time is short." Valari's mouth opened, but she didn't know what to say. Her hands were trembling, her mind racing. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not a leader. I'm not special." The machine turned to Jackson for a moment, as if scanning him. "Your guardian bleeds, easily," said coldly, "but his loyalty is strong." Jackson frowned. What does that mean? The machine ignored him and floated away. Deeper into the temple, Valari followed without a word. Drawn by something ancient and unseen, they walked into a wide chamber, filled with broken statues and strange machines covered in dust. In the center was a large platform surrounded by glowing pillars. Valari stepped onto it, and the entire room lit up like stars had burst inside the walls. Jackson shielded his eyes as the glow wrapped around her like a storm of light. Symbols floated in the air, spinning, changing, whispering in a language older than memory. Then everything stopped. The light vanished. The whispers ended. Valari dropped to her knees, panting, her eyes wide and glowing for just a moment. "I saw everything," she whispered. "The war, the fall, the escape. My blood remembers it all." Jackson moved to her side and helped her up. She leaned on him, too weak to stand on her own. The machine returned and said, "The jungle will now test you. If you survive, the path to the heart of the temple will open." Before Jackson could respond, the ground shook violently, the walls cracked, and the ceiling groaned. Valari's eyes snapped open, full of fear. "It's here," she said. "The Nightclaw found us." A loud roar shook the chamber, followed by a flash of red light. Jackson pulled Valari behind a stone column and aimed his blaster. "Looks like we've got our test," he said. Valari clutched his jacket tightly and whispered, "Don't let it take me." He looked back at her, eyes calm and sure. Not a chance. Smoke floated through the cracks of the temple ceiling, like ghostly fingers. Everything was shaking, as if the entire jungle had come alive. Valari gripped Jackson's hand tighter than ever before, her legs too weak to move. The Nightclaw's roar echoed again, but this time there was something different. A second voice joined it, deeper, colder, older. Jackson scanned the hall with narrowed eyes, sweat rolling down his temple from the shadows near the broken wall. 2 red eyes blinked then forth. Then 6. "There's more than one," Jackson whispered, voice like stone. Valari swallowed hard, her whole body trembling. The floating machine that had called her heir now hovered silently above. It made no move to fight, no warning, only a single word. "Run." Jackson didn't wait. He scooped Valari up without asking and darted toward a narrow side tunnel. A stone shattered behind them as claws scraped along the floor. The screech of metal on metal echoed through the ancient halls. Valari buried her face in Jackson's shoulder, trying not to cry. They turned corner after corner. Moving deeper underground, the temple lights flickered and buzzed. Like the place itself was panicking, Jackson slid down a slope of loose stone and ducked into a room half buried by earth and roots. Valari tumbled from his arms, coughing, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't ready." Jackson crouched beside her, checking his blaster's charge. "You didn't fail," he said. "You triggered something ancient, and now it wants you back." Valari looked at her hands, still glowing faintly with the temple's mark. "I don't know what's in my blood," she said, "but it's waking up." Jackson sat back and thought for a second. If this place responded to you, maybe there's more it can give us. More help, more answers. Valari hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think there's a core room," she said, "the heart of the temple, if we can reach it. Maybe it can stop the Nightclaws." Jackson stood and offered his hand again. "No turning back now," he said. Valari took his hand and stood, still weak, but more steady. They slipped through cracks in the wall, finding an old maintenance shaft. It smelled like oil and rust, but it was quiet. Their boots echoed through the tight corridor as they moved toward the unknown. Strange pulses began to hum through the walls, soft and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Valari pressed her hand to the wall. Then the lights responded. They followed the glow deeper. A soft chime echoed ahead, followed by the whoosh of a door opening. They entered a round chamber made entirely of glowing stone and smooth metal. In the center, a floating orb of light hovered above a platform. Valari stepped forward, drawn to it like a magnet. The orb spoke in a voice that was not male or female, not old or young. "You have returned," it said. Valari blinked, confused. "I've never been here before. Your ancestors have." The orb replied, "Their memories are within you." Valari stepped onto the platform, and again the light wrapped around her. This time she didn't fall. She stood tall, her eyes closed. Breathing slow and deep, Jackson stayed back, watching. Protecting the orb spoke again. "Would you awaken what sleeps inside?" Valari didn't speak, but her body answered. The temple began to shake, not in fear, but in power. Symbols rose from the walls, floating, spinning, burning. The pulse in the floor became stronger, faster, louder. Jackson shielded his eyes again. As Valari's body lifted into the air, the glowing marks spread across her skin like golden fire. She cried out, not in pain, but in awakening. When she landed back on her feet, her eyes burned with new energy. She looked at Jackson and said one word, "Run." But this time, it wasn't fear in her voice. It was command. The temple roared as walls opened, revealing long paths once sealed for centuries from behind them. Screeches came again. The night claws were near. Jackson turned to run, but Valari didn't move. "I can't leave," she said, her voice steady. "This place needs me." Jackson's heart sank. "You'll die if you stay." She shook her head. "Not anymore." She raised her hand, and a barrier of energy formed between them and the approaching danger. The orb spoke once more. "The air has awakened the first seal. One more remains." Jackson stepped back slowly, watching as Valari stood inside the light like a flame that wouldn't go out. He didn't know what she had become, but he knew she was no longer just the girl who clung to his back in fear. Valari turned her head slightly and smiled. "Go," she said. "I'll find you again." And then the wall between them closed, leaving Jackson alone, heart racing in a silent corridor that now pulsed with power. The moment the wall sealed shut, Jackson punched it with his fist. He didn't care that it was solid metal and stone. He didn't care that his knuckles split and bled. All he cared about was the fact that Valari was trapped on the other side, and he had left her there. He stepped back, breathing hard, the silence pressing in like a weight. The glowing hallway stretched behind him. Pulsing with alien power, he wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear him now, so he ran. The corridor twisted and sloped downward, deeper into the planet. Each step felt like he was falling farther away from her. Valari had told him she'd find him again. But what if she couldn't? What if the power she awakened was too much? What if she was already gone? Jackson didn't slow down. Not when the lights flickered, not when the ground shook again, not even when he turned a corner and found himself face to face with a nightclaw. The beast was massive, its body all shadows and muscle, its eyes glowed red, and its claws dripped. With something dark and steaming, Jackson raised his blaster, already knowing it wouldn't be enough. The nightclaw leapt, and everything became fire and pain. The two crashed into the wall, metal cracking behind them. Jackson fired again and again, until his weapon sparked and died. He grabbed a shard of broken tech from the floor and stabbed blindly. The beast roared, slamming him to the ground. His ribs screamed, his vision blurred. It raised a claw to end him, then a beam of golden light shot down from the ceiling. The nightclaw shrieked and stumbled back. A second light followed, cutting through the air like a sword. The creature turned and fled into the dark, leaving a trail of smoke behind. Jackson groaned, trying to sit up. He was bleeding, breathing ragged, one arm nearly useless. The lights faded and silence returned, but he was still alive. He crawled to the nearest wall and leaned against it. Everything hurt, even blinking. "I'm not going to make it out of here," he muttered. His vision dimmed, and the world began to fade. But before darkness took him completely, he heard footsteps, soft ones, careful ones. Almost like a whisper on the floor, a figure appeared from the shadows, tall, glowing faintly. It wasn't Valari. It was one of her kind but ancient, with silver skin and eyes that held stars. The figure knelt beside Jackson and touched his chest. A warmth spread through him, strange and sharp. He gasped as his wounds began to close. The pain faded, not completely, but enough. The figure spoke, not with a voice, but with a feeling. "You carry her memory," it said. "You are marked by her choice." Jackson didn't understand, but he nodded. The figure helped him to his feet and pointed toward a hidden door. "She is not finished," it said, "but you must reach the summit." Before Jackson could ask anything, the figure vanished like dust in wind. He turned toward the path ahead, a soft hum growing louder with each step. Even injured, even afraid, he walked forward. Not for the mission, not for orders, but for Valari. Meanwhile, deep within the sealed chamber, Valari stood before a large circular device. Her eyes were calm now, glowing like embers. The orb hovered beside her, explaining things she didn't fully understand. Her blood had triggered something locked away for centuries. She was a key, not a warrior. But she could become both. Her fingers moved over the device, feeling warmth beneath metal. She remembered Jackson's voice, steady and strong even when afraid. She remembered his arms catching her, his body shielding hers. He was injured now, maybe dying. And it was her fault. "I'm done hiding," she said. The orb pulsed, approving energy gathered around her again. But this time, she didn't resist. She welcomed it. She became part of the temple. And the temple became part of her. Far above, the jungle stirred. Storm clouds formed in silence. And strange birds scattered from their nests. The ruins began to glow faintly, and distant creatures howled in confusion. Something was changing, something very old and very alive. And in the center of it all, two hearts were moving toward each other again. One broken, one burning, but both unshakable. Lightning danced across the cracked sky like angry veins. The jungle below shook as if something monstrous had awakened from a long dream. In the center of the storm stood Valari, her cloak torn, her eyes glowing like fire trapped in ice. She was no longer just an alien girl, no longer the one who flinched in fear. Now, she was something more, something older, something dangerous. The ground beneath her feet responded to her presence. Glowing vines moved aside to clear her path. The ruined towers around her pulsed like they were alive again, and from the darkness ahead, the Nightclaw stepped into view. Its black body shimmered with oily light, muscles twitching, claws soaked in old blood, but this time it did not rush forward. It stopped, stared at her, and tilted its head. Confused, it could smell something different now. Power. Valari walked toward it with slow steps. Each breath she took was calm, each heartbeat steady. The orb from the temple floated behind her like a silent witness. Her fingers opened, and a weapon formed from pure light shaped itself into her hand. Not a blaster, not a blade, but something in between, ancient and alive. She didn't speak, didn't shout, she simply moved. The Nightclaw lunged, claws wide, teeth flashing. Valari ducked under its arm and slashed upward with her light weapon. The beast screamed, a high screech full of pain and rage. Black blood sprayed across the dirt as it crashed into a tree. But it wasn't dead. It rose again, faster, meaner. Valari spun around, her bare feet light on the ground. The beast swiped, and she jumped backward, flipping in the air. She landed without a sound, then charged forward again, the light in her hands burned brighter, And for a second, just a second, the Nightclaw hesitated. She struck again, a perfect hit to its side. The creature roared and knocked her back, sending her rolling across the ground. Valari groaned, the pain real now, sharp and deep. Her hand trembled, but she forced herself up, blood on her lips. She stared at the monster and whispered to herself, "I will not run again." Behind her, the orb spoke softly. "The air is learning. Meanwhile, not far away." Jackson stumbled through the jungle, one hand gripping a tree. He was bleeding again, breath shallow, every step like lifting a mountain. But then he heard it a scream, not human, not natural. The Nightclaw, his heart surged with fear and fire. He followed the sound without thinking, crashing through the brush. He burst into a clearing and saw her Valari. She was hurt. Bump, she stood tall, shining like a star, facing the beast alone, Valari. He shouted, but she didn't turn. The Nightclaw charged one final time. Valari raised her arm, light crackling in her palm, just before the beast could reach her. Jackson raised his blaster and fired his last shot. The bolt hit the monster in the eye, blinding it. It turned wildly, confused, and that was the opening she needed. Valari launched forward, both hands on the weapon. She drove the light deep into its chest. The Nightclaw froze, then let out one last roar before collapsing. Silence returned. The jungle held its breath. Then slowly, the storm faded. Valari fell to her knees, breathing hard, covered in dust and glowing blood. Jackson ran to her, dropped beside her, and pulled her close. "You did it," he whispered. "You crazy alien girl. You actually did it." Valari let out a laugh. Tired, but real. "I didn't do it alone," she said. Resting her head against him, he looked at her glowing skin and whispered, "What are you now?" Valari closed her eyes and said, "Whatever I have to be." Ash fell from the sky like soft snow. The jungle was quiet now. Too quiet, like it was watching them. Jackson stood with Valari's arm around his shoulder, her weight leaning on him. They were both hurt, bloodied, and burned, but they were alive. More than that, they had changed. The body of the Nightclaw still smoked behind them. It didn't vanish like a ghost or dissolve like some magical beast. It remained there, solid and heavy, as proof. Proof that even monsters can fall. Valari didn't speak much as they walked through the broken jungle. She stared ahead, her steps slow but sure. Jackson kept looking at her, unsure whether she was still the same girl who once clung to his back. He wasn't sure anymore she had become something else. They reached the place where the temple first opened. The stone doors had closed again, but now they glowed with a warm light. The orb floated above them and pulsed gently. "You have passed the trial," it said, "but the path forward remains." Valari nodded without fear. "What path?" Jackson asked, voice hoarse. The orb turned toward him, the path of the air. Her bloodline was never meant to fade. Valari stepped forward, her hand brushing the glowing stone. Images filled the sky, flashes of war, ancient cities, starships falling from the sky, then children, her people, running into caves, hiding, waiting. Your people were never cowards. The orb continued. They were protectors. Valari blinked slowly. "All this time," she said, "I thought we had lost." "No," said the orb. "You survived." The temple began to shift again, this time not as a trap, but as an invitation. Walls moved, doors opened, and stairs formed beneath the soil. A new chamber appeared, a throne room carved from crystal and stone. At the center stood a strange seat, ancient and beautiful, pulsing with energy. Valari turned to Jackson, her voice low. "This was meant for someone else." He shook his head. "It's meant for whoever's still standing." She gave him a small smile. "I'm not sitting on that." She said, "Not yet." Jackson nodded. "Then let's find a way out of here." They climbed out of the ruins together. step by step. The jungle no longer growled at them. The air was clean now, like the storm had passed. And then, high above them, human ship broke through the clouds. Jackson grabbed his radio and laughed weakly. "This is Scout Jackson," he said, requesting immediate pickup. There was a pause. Then a voice responded, shocked and confused. "Jackson, you're alive." "Barely," he answered. "And I'm not alone." When the ship landed, soldiers rushed out but stopped when they saw Valari. Her skin still shimmered. Her eyes still glowed. They reached for their weapons, unsure, afraid. Jackson stepped in front of her without thinking. "She's with me," he said. "She saved my life." Valari didn't hide behind him. She stood tall, looked the soldiers in the eyes, and said, "I don't need protection." Then she smirked and added, "But I'll stay close anyway." Jackson chuckled. "Just don't climb on my back again." They boarded the ship together. Side by side, as the engines roared to life, Valari stared out the window. The jungle grew smaller and smaller until it was just a green blur. She touched the glass and whispered, "I will return." Jackson heard her, but said nothing. He knew this wasn't the end. Not for her, not for him, not for whatever came next. And somewhere deep in the stars, something ancient stirred again, because the star air had awakened, and this time she was not alone.